Welcome to the Kent Lapp Podcast.
All righty. Well, Chad Karger, thanks for being on the podcast.
Oh man, my pleasure.
How are you, man? How was your week?
I'm good. It's Friday, and I'm glad.
Me too.
I've been looking forward to this conversation. We weren't able to do it last week.
Yeah, it was last week, right?
We had a situation with a cat, and
a personal situation or
yeah,
work?
yeah. No,
I didn't know you had. Yeah, you did have a cat.
Two cats and a
yeah.
dog. Yeah. And so my wife and daughter love the cats. And we'll just leave it at one of them went missing. And my wife was out of town. So, yeah, I had to do all hands on deck, total focus.
Did you get it?
Thankfully, the cat came home about 72 hours later.
Okay.
Came knocking on the back door at about midnight.
No way.
Yeah, my daughter was sitting downstairs and went and got it right upstairs.
How do you find cats? Because you can't call a cat, right? They won't come like a dog does?
Exactly. And so the cat that stays inside, it snuck out. The garage door was raised. It goes out into the garage to eat. Went out, got on the wrong side of the garage door going down.
Yeah.
Got stuck. And I think it just went and hid.
Gotcha.
Until it had a clear shot back to the house 72 hours later.
Yeah. Well, not a bad plan.
Just thankful that the cat's home and I got here to do the podcast.
Yes, absolutely. Well, I'm glad you're here too, man.
Yeah.
I was curious, have you noticed and kind of, well, I assume you have. I'm curious how your patients, the people you're working with, consult. Well, it's counseling, right?
Yeah, it's counseling.
I'm curious how they are doing just at large right now with COVID going on. I mean, and you work specifically with people in the music industry, which seems like that industry is one of the hardest hit industries.
Oh yeah.
What kind of a toll are you seeing this taking on your people?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. At this point, people have, really, they've been home for a few months.
Mm-hmm.
Touring schedules are pretty much gone for the year. So people, the big production agencies, Live Nation, those guys that put on these big shows, they're not talking concerts until like spring of next year.
Really?
Yeah. And so that realization has finally settled in. We've kind of had this gradual realization that if you seat anywhere from say 1,000 to 20,000, you're not probably going to do a show in 2020. Well, if you seat like maybe 200 or less, that might be possible.
Mm-hmm.
And then you see people doing sort of variations where they go do the drive-ins, shows and all that. But so I think what to answer your question, I think at this point with where we are in the shutdown and the quarantine as it relates to touring artists, because that's all we see as touring artists, is that they're realizing that nothing is happening for them for the rest of the year. And for most of them, that's where they make all their money.
I would think.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, because that's where the music industry is now.
Yeah. So
you're not, people, it's all free on the internet and all these types of things. I mean, I guess it's not technically, but it seemed like the concerts was still kind of the last man standing that's still a good way to make money in the music industry. And now that's shut off. Yeah.
So unless your streaming numbers are like astronomical.
Right.
You're making all your money, in touring. And for most artists that we see, they may seat, 15,000 people or say 10,000 or 2,000 people in a room. And so for them, it's a huge hit. They're recircling the wagons and trying to figure out who they can keep on their team and how they make it to the end of the year. And it's really crunch time. I mean, there's a few artists that, they can live a whole year without touring, and it's almost like a blessing to them to be able to kind of shut the thing down and take a break. And but for most artists, and I think it's not only a function of business, but it's also sort of a spiritual, psychological thing that this is the thing they enjoy doing more than anything else.
This is kind of what they're put on the planet to do, at least for this period of their life, and they can't do it.
No, they can, and being on, doing live streams and stuff are great, and some people have done really, really good with that. But they, the artists loves the fruition of standing on the stage and offering his or her music to a live audience. Like that's the end goal.
Yes.
And so
it's fuel for the fire. That's like, that gets that's why they wake up in the morning.
Exactly. So to be blocked there and for that to be uncertain about when it's going to shut back on or come back on, that creates a lot of psychological turbulence, and it's akin to trauma. And for some, it is trauma. So, trauma basically is just being in a situation where you're stuck and you feel powerless and the outcome is uncertain. So that's really simple definition. And when you intensify that and prolong it, it intensifies and prolongs the trauma, the effects of trauma. So that's where we're dealing with a lot is, either little T trauma or for some big T trauma, in this situation. So
the big T trauma being like their organization might not make it through, or
it's a real existential crisis, about which one of my bandmates is going to be with me after all this. I released a new album right at the beginning of this,
and now
that I worked on for 2 years, and now I can't tour it. That's where some of them have really, are really struggling. And
the album's out.
Yeah.
So it's not like we can pull it back and wait until next year.
No, the album's out. They let it go. And so all the promo and all the support touring and all that you do after you've worked in the studio for 2 years, say on a project, is gone.
That's so painful.
Yeah. There's just it's that frustration, like, you can't finish the thing that you started.
Yeah.
And that just creates a lot of angst and clenching.
Yeah, I can imagine.
And so that's what Porter's Call, that's who I work with and work for, has been around for 20 years and has always seen touring artists. It's always been free. It's never cost any touring artist anything. And we're always available, and it feels like now this particular season really brings the mission of that organization into sharp focus.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Because we're there and we've been there for a while, so people know us. They know they can come and call and reach out. So it's just a big point of feeling like you're really having that impact.
Oh yeah. And what types of musicians again? Is it all of them?
It's anybody that's a touring artist who makes their living, primary living as a touring artist. And so like if you're a musician who plays as a sideman or woman and is also a studio musician, they don't qualify for the services that are being offered.
Okay.
So you kind of have to be a member of the band, be in the band, own the band, be, that kind of thing. Or be a like a loved one, like a spouse, partner, husband, wife.
That's going along.
Yeah, so they can come in as well. So.
Okay, gotcha. Is that fairly uncommon? Like if someone's touring on the road, that their spouse joins them?
Yeah, I was actually just talking with someone today about that. And when they first got married, before they had children, this guy's wife came out and helped them do work. She helped with socials and helped with one of the kids of the other bandmates who came out and that sort of thing. And but it gets really complicated because it's just your whole entire life, and it really depends on how you travel. If you're a 15-passenger band, then your spouse isn't probably going to join you. The spouses usually don't hitch a ride until there's like a bus or two involved.
Yeah, that 15-passenger van, that's the messy middle, isn't it? That's the hell zone, right? Because you're good enough to be touring and getting out there, which is great news, but you're not good enough, or you're not big enough yet to have that bus. And oh man, one of my friends he was so burnt out on it, man. That 15-passenger bus thing. And then it's breaking down, and man, I remember my youth group days driving around in a 15-passenger van, like going out camping for a weekend or whatnot with the youth group, those church, prototypical like church-related activities where you're in a 15-passenger van, it's a 2 or 3 hour drive or whatever. Oh, those things don't drive well.
No, and so you could imagine if you're like on, say, a 3-week tour. Right, and you're driving through the middle of the night.
Awful.
You're aiming for the next motel or the next venue. I mean,
Oh man.
So it's funny. You can kind of, the evolution of an artist's career, you can sort of, the icon of their transportation sort of marks their progression, right?
Yeah, I'm sure.
So it's their car, then it's the 15-passenger van, then it's the Sprinter.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
There's a Sprinter phase.
There's a Sprinter phase. Okay. The bandwagon. There's a thing called a bandwagon that's a little bit bigger than a Sprinter, and then you get into the buses. Okay. And then it's one bus, two bus, three bus.
Yeah. So. Now, when there is kind of this crisis happening in the industry, does this mean more calls for you, or does this just mean same amount of calls but more distressed people?
I would say probably a more consistent coming. So like a person who typically couldn't come, every other week or every week, now all of a sudden has the time and has a strong desire to do that. And sometimes, about a month into the quarantine was when we really started seeing people surface, especially people with families, because, they have arranged their family life around the fact that I'm gone 100 days out of the year.
Right.
So now all of a sudden I'm home, more than I'm gone, and that's a new set of challenges.
Yeah.
Or the person who's quarantining really hard, who is single. I mean, they they're having their groceries delivered. They're not getting out. They're used to being around gobs of people all the time.
Right.
So it's a real fall off the cliff kind of moment.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would say, it probably has intensified it a little bit. More people wanting to get in and just trying to accommodate as many people as possible. And of course, most of our meetings have been on video.
Okay.
For the better part of 3 months. We're just now opening the office back up. Yeah.
When, COVID aside, what percentage of your sessions are in person versus phone call or video?
Oh, I'd say probably, 98% are in person.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right. So just before we turned the mics on, we were talking about you had a phone call.
Yeah.
But that's rare.
Yeah, it's most people can come in.
Because I was picturing all in person. You mentioned the phone call. Okay.
Yeah.
So it is mostly in person.
The phone calls come with people who live in other parts of the country, the world, or people who are on the road touring.
Okay. And what percent roughly is Christian music, country music, and I don't know. We could lump in. I don't know what other category would you lump? Would you put pop in its own category?
Yeah, so we
rock?
We have like a form they fill out before they come in, and that's one of the things they do is kind of give us a sense of what kind of music they play, just so we can know. But I would say when Porter's Call started, it was mostly Christian music.
Okay.
The Capitol Records in Providence, which is a Sony Christian label, came together and actually helped start Porter's Call. But it has, with our founder, Al Andrews, but I would say in the last 10 years, it's become mostly, country and rock / pop, indie, all that, Americana.
Yeah.
And I would say, maybe a quarter of it is Christian music.
Interesting. Do you see personality common denominators among the different categories of music? Like, do you see your country people tend to be more this type of person, and your rock people are more this type of person?
Well, it's interesting. I would say that I probably carry that structure in my head, but time and time again, they get all blown up.
Okay.
So no sooner have I got a stereotype arranged, than and now I know better. So I would say no. It really, they kind of defy.
Okay.
Yeah. Who they're supposed to be according to the
there's not really a stereotype. There's not really a stereotype that really works for different kinds of music.
Genre of music. No.
But now there is sort of between performing or touring artists and songwriters, right? Because there are songwriters out there, singer-songwriters that are super talented, but they're choosing to be a songwriter because they don't want to be traveling.
That's right.
100 days a year, 200 days a year, whatever.
That's right.
They don't want to be performing in front of large crowds. They could.
Yeah.
They don't want to. So are there are there traits that you see that make a kind of a successful touring artist? Again, personality traits, or I'm even curious, do most of them wind up being like, so naturally I would kind of think maybe they're extroverts. They like to be around people and everything. But if I had to guess, I'd guess introvert. Because those people tend to.
Yeah, I would say a lot of the people are a lot of the time have a lot of energy on the stage, but
Okay.
off the stage, it's not uncommon for them to want to be alone and be by themselves.
Oh yeah. Yeah. That is not surprising to me.
Yeah. But I mean, again, it sort of defies, the moment you have someone sort of
right
pegged, they kind of blow up the next person walks in, kind of blows up the order. And I think that's part of the over the years, what Porter's Call has been able to do is to really be a place where they could come in and just be themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So that they just feel really comfortable in that space.
Yeah.
And whether it's myself or the other counselor, Beth, meeting with them, and their spouses feel really safe there. And over time, it's become more and more talked about in town. So people don't shy away from saying
Porter's Call or counseling in general.
Counseling in general.
Okay.
We go to Porter's Call. We went to the workshop at Onsite. So you've seen that kind of, stigma lifted.
Yeah.
And so people are much more comfortable. But I think that's something that we really try to do is create a hospitable environment so that a person can come in and be themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What are some of the biggest challenges that a touring musician faces? I mean, I have to think family is one of them.
Oh, if you have a family, it's just, one of the worst things that you could do. I mean, it's really difficult, especially when you're back to the vehicle situation, prior to having multiple buses.
Yeah.
If you have a family, it's a real challenge.
Yeah.
Some acts, each person in the group has their own bus, and so if they have a family, they can bring their own family on the bus.
Okay.
So.
Yeah.
But that's not very many people are like that, I would say, I think about like job hazards, kind of like, other jobs that you might have particular hazards to your health, you know?
Absolutely.
So if I can use that as the kind of the example of that, I would say a job hazard in music is one of them is fame, obviously. It's obviously what kind of everybody is sort of going for, at least all the accoutrements that go with fame. But fame is a particularly nasty thing that once you have it, you realize it has a hold of you. And it's not, it's just the objectification of a person. It's dehumanizing. And so that's a really difficult thing for people to deal with.
In person, on social media, just all of it.
All
Wherever
of it.
we go, someone knows who I am and someone wants a picture and just, okay.
Yeah, just an objectification of that person. So you're a brand, you're a song, you're a, a performer. And so, and sometimes, it's hard for the artist as much as it is the fan or the people who are expecting the artist to be that way. Sometimes the pressures internally, they're expecting themselves to be a certain way. So it's not just one way or the other, but fame. I think another one is that's particularly pernicious is like the nature of the work is how you're successful is so elusive. The terms of success. It's not like you get plans to build a bridge. You go build a bridge, and there's the bridge, and it's working, and everybody's crossing it. I did my job. I'm a success. I took home a paycheck. So you're always sort of chasing something, and for most artists, they can't. Their album cycle may be 2 years. An album gets written and is out for 2 years, then they're back in doing another one. And so, if they're in a record deal, multi-record deal with a record label here in town, there's a lot of, pressure about getting that thing again, capturing the essence again. And that's a real ethereal, abstract thing.
Oh, I can imagine. Like if they have a really good record, trying to follow that.
Yeah, follow it up and then, just what are the terms of success? Is it album sales? Is it ticket sales? Is it number ones, top tens? Is it social media? Is it streams? What is the you know what I'm saying?
Right.
That's all kind of moving, evolving targets.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah.
I think comparison is another one that I'm constantly kind of talking with. Is artists inevitably, no matter how much they are on the front end or how deep they are into their career, with any amount of fame that you could imagine, they still struggle with comparing themselves to their peers, to the market, to the expectation.
Really? Even if they're famous?
Even if they're famous.
Do you think especially if they're famous?
It might be at times, yeah.
Okay.
I think in particular, that's one of those fame, side effects is that you're constantly in that posture.
Yeah, because I haven't been around enough famous people to tell, but the rare times that I have, I pick up on, at least, obviously I'm not going to say any names, but there's almost like an amplified attention on what others are doing, where the market's at, what I'm doing, how that strategy. It's just so intense and always on.
Yeah.
It seems exhausting.
Yeah, I think it's if you're the CEO of a large company and you had 500 employees, you would kind of live in this space where you kind of know, like, these people are all kind of paying attention, looking out their window, as it were, taking care of the job to keep this thing going. And as an artist, you're the CEO, you're the product, you're the brand,
right?
You're the marketing.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
And so that's part of the effect of that. And so you do have a chair that's kind of pulled up to the window all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And you're very aware of critics. You're very aware of who's done what, and you're kind of prone to be like, well, how in the world is that artist getting this success, and I can't get out of the top 20, and they're in the top 5 consistently.
Yeah.
So there's that kind of stuff is just bad for our soul.
Right.
No matter who you are or what you do.
Yeah.
All the things we're talking about just creates a space that's very inhumane, and it really is dehumanizing.
Mm-hmm.
It diminishes who we are and how God has made us to function best.
Yeah, 100%. And what are your thoughts on the comparison thing, even outside of the music industry? Because I think a lot of people deal with that.
Oh yeah,
I deal with that.
Oh yeah, me too. I was, before I did the work that I do with artists, I used to do this work with pastors.
Counsel pastors?
Yeah. And
I'm not sure if I knew that.
Yeah.
Was this when you were a pastor?
So I had an organization that we started in 2001 that I was a part of really up until the time I moved to Nashville.
Which was?
2017.
Yeah.
And I was doing the work, essentially, that I'm doing now was alongside of my regular day job as a pastor. I was overseeing this organization and doing this organization, working with pastors and their spouses. And yeah, I would see it there. I saw it there as a pastor. So I'm not, that's part of the ability, I think, to do the work that I do, is being aware of these tendencies in myself and how corrosive they can be.
Yes.
So that I can help someone else.
100%.
Self-awareness is really key for me.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would see it in, pastors struggle with that. Artists struggle with that. So I agree. This is a particularly nasty human disease,
For sure. And what do you tell them? I mean, the one thing that I think of a fair bit is just that everyone has a different story, and there's so many layers, and we are such complex people. Like this, my friend Alan one time said he sometimes has thought in this way before, where, like, you take, for example, a person like you. Well, you have a particular upbringing, you have particular parents, you have a particular ethnicity, you went to particular schools, you have particular, things that were against you and for you, and opportunities and life experiences, and you happen to have a wife and you have kids. Like, there's this whole world of story wrapped up in Chad Karger. Like, so much. It's so complex. And the, you're 50 years old, right?
That's right.
So, and you have these 50 years of all of this experience, but it's not just you. Like, even Lincoln, he's almost 10. There's a lot going on with him, and me. Like, every person has so much going on. And he just said, like, this just blows his mind. If you were to picture just sitting, say, on a hilltop overlooking an interstate, and just think about how many people drive past you, and just think about every one of those people has that story. It's like a world of story wrapped up in that one person. But it's not just one story going down the interstate. It's like there's one. Now they're going the other way. Like, so many. Life is so complex. And that's one thing that I remind myself of at times when I start dipping into that comparison thing is, look, you're the only you, man. There's no one else. There's not another you. Mm-hmm. So it's an unfair. It's just at a base level, it's unfair to compare because no one else has your experiences. You don't have their experiences. Yeah. And so everyone's just so different. And I also think like maybe this comes from the American dream or kind of the whole pick yourself up by your bootstraps or whatever. But don't you think also in recent years there's been kind of maybe a emphasis on one's ability to carve out a path for themselves? Sure, working hard is important and having goals and all that. Obviously it's important. But man, someone's upbringing and their atmosphere and their environment and their surroundings and their parents and their friends, that's a big deal. Yeah, it's a big deal.
You're basically saying like once you factor in all that, there's really no comparison.
There's really not. Yeah. And then the other thing I think of too is like, well, instead of focusing on me comparing myself to someone else, how about I compare myself to my own potential? You know what I mean? Like that's where the attention should go. But I still struggle with it. So what are some of your tips when you talk people through that?
I mean, I think this is, something that we labor, with the hope of heaven kind of thing, like that in partnership for me, from a faith perspective, in partnership with my friends and the people who love me, and of course the Holy Spirit at work in me. It's like, this is the thing that I will work until my dying day to fully dismantle. This is one of those things. I think you're exactly right. It's like being comfortable in your own skin, recognizing, embracing, this is who I am, and I'm not all of those other things. And this is what, for right now in my life, I'm called to do, not all those other things, And I think social media intensifies all of this. This is like, it just turbocharges this habit of our being, because the whole thing, that's what it's all about. You're constantly scrolling and checking out.
Oh yeah,
everybody's highlight reel,
Yeah.
So I think that's a particularly bad thing for this habit of ours,
Yeah.
But I would say that thing that you're kind of getting at there at the end is like for me to begin wrestling with, the why, the purpose of my life, and become singularly focused on that, and that's the thing. It's like. And while mine may be similar to someone else's, everybody's is a variation, and so mine's differentiated from another person's. And so I can, if I really, commit myself to be the person that purpose calls me to be, then I can throw myself into that, and I can seek wisdom and get counsel and learn from my mistakes and progress. And I can also be grateful as opposed to resentful for the people who are alongside of me doing their thing. Mm-hmm. So cultivating gratefulness, gratitude, I think is really key to offsetting comparison. And, I can be grateful and celebrate with someone else's success.
Yeah.
And realize, like you're saying, all of us have a part to play. Mm-hmm. If it's a collective of artists, it's like all of us are telling a story slightly different. So be bold and tell it,
Yes.
Pastors, all pastors, they lead all kinds of congregations. And so those congregations demand, unique abilities and skills. Mm-hmm. So fully embrace that and live into that.
Yeah.
So I think the first thing for me is just really getting squared up on the why, mm-hmm. And really understanding that and really digesting that,
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think, the comparison thing gets ugly quick because you tend to...
It's a race to the bottom.
It is. Yeah. and it really leads to jealousy very quickly,
there's no light at the end of that tunnel.
Yeah. And then jealousy leads to cynicism and then bitterness and, oh man.
All the bad fruit.
Yeah. All the bad fruit. And then you meet that person if you haven't yet and you realize, oh, they're kind of nice.
Yeah.
You justified their success by thinking they're a demon or thinking they're just not a good person. Mm-hmm. Turns out they're actually a great person. How do you handle I'm picturing you have multiple sessions per day. How many sessions per day would be average for you? And then how do you handle that stress?
Well, thankfully there's a Friday.
Okay.
Yeah. I was thinking about it, like when I used to preach every Sunday, I feel on Friday, like today is Friday at the end of a long week. I feel on Friday afternoon when I'm done, like I would feel Sunday afternoon having preached 1 or 2 or 3 times.
Okay. Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah. And so it's kind of okay, I've done my thing, you know?
Yes.
Yeah. So normally I would see at the very most 6 people, but that's a lot for me.
In a day?
Yeah, in a day.
Okay.
But usually it's closer to 4, but sometimes 5.
Mm-hmm.
And then, Fridays is a little bit different, but yeah, so that's typically kind of my week is that 5 to 4 per day, have a little break for lunch, and then I don't start super early, but I just go really kind of back to back throughout the day.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So
do you have a 15-minute break in? Is that common or
sometimes?
Not?
Sometimes it's like the doctor's office, and I will go over and
okay.
There's somebody waiting, but
yeah.
Typically there's a buffer there, about 15 minutes to collect myself and kind of read over my notes for the next person coming. And then usually at the end of the day, I have to go back and do notes, type them into the thing that we use that collates all that. So a lot in that way, like a doctor at the end of a rotation has to sit down and actually type up the notes about who all they've seen. I kind of do that, and then that helps me in the next session. And then I'll partner sometimes with the female counterpart counselor. Beth and I will team up, and so she can read the notes if she's going to see that person, in the practice. That's in the confidentiality.
That happens sometimes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. But that's probably not that's probably not super common, is it?
No.
Isn't it best to stick with the person yourself?
Exactly. What's more common is I will work with someone outside of our practice. So I will get a psychiatrist involved, eating therapist that works with them on their diet, or someone who does a specific kind of therapy. And there I'm sharing notes with that person's permission, to team up and kind of give them the care they need. But so that my day includes, it's really important to kind of keep good notes, because that's what really helps my brain to connect the dots as I'm working along.
Yeah.
Because I do lose track of names and faces.
Oh, I'm sure you'd have to, yeah. What part of your day, when are you generally like most exhausted? At the end of the day, or is it when you're halfway through? Or?
No, I'd say probably the end of the day.
Okay.
I don't know if it's my personality or what, but I feel pretty good up until, that last leg, like that, the last lap. Maybe it's the last appointment, or after that appointment leaves, sitting down and going back and doing all the notes.
Okay.
That can be tough sometimes.
Yeah.
So
are you introverted?
Probably more so than not.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I if I get around my close friends, I'm not in a shell.
Right.
But it's not, I'm perfectly happy with a small crowd.
Yep.
As in me and my wife.
Yeah. I get you, man.
Yeah. Or my kids.
Yeah.
Or our neighbors or something like that. But no, I'm not super outgoing and love the buzz of a big crowd. That's not my personality.
Yeah.
No.
But when you're in these sessions, I think the reason I'm asking you mostly out of admiration, because I so respect guys and gals that do this, because I just think, man, if I were to do that, I would get through 1 or 2 and I just need to go take a nap. You know what I mean? Like I would need some space. Yeah. Like my brain would be just fried, kind of like so overloaded. It feels like.
I get that way sometimes.
Do you?
Yeah. It's, some situations are much more demanding than other situations. That's been one of the interesting things during the quarantine. The video is especially hard because not only are you in a hard situation, but you have this extra layer, there's another wall to climb.
Yes.
Which is this stupid video that freezes up. And
yes.
So you're just that much more exhausted.
Yes.
But for me, I live inside of I think a pretty strict kind of routine, by getting up, working out, kind of taking care of myself. So I feel like I can kind of replenish some of that energy and brain space. But when you're doing something that you love to do, it's its own kind of energy regeneration.
Mm-hmm.
I absolutely love being in that process with people.
Mm.
I mean, and whereas my wife has often said to me, I don't know how you do it, like over and over and over again, saying some of the same things to people, you know. But for me, like just seeing a person move along on that incremental path and that journey and realizing big things or small things,
Mm-hmm.
it's like, that's it for me. Like I absolutely love that. I loved it as a pastor too.
Okay.
But I this is probably the most pure form of that, you know, in terms of one-on-one, dropping in way down in the weeds, not just episodes in a person's life, but like the actual thought, you know, the feeling,
right,
being in that kind of space.
Yes.
And then working your way toward health from there.
Yeah.
Know? So that's just really, that recharges me.
Yeah.
The thing that probably tires me out the most is when someone actually isn't responding.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what wears me out.
Okay.
Because you just feel like you're just pushing that boulder.
Yeah.
And you can't just kick the front door down.
Right.
You can't just storm the castle. You've got to be, kind and gentle and respectful, and so that when someone's seemingly really dug in and they're having a hard time, breaking out of that can be really tiresome.
I can imagine. I want to come back to that. And just a note on the video, I just read an article yesterday in the Wall Street Journal that there's science behind why Zoom calls are so exhausting. First of all, if you put a Zoom call on a 56-inch TV, it activates the fight or flight part of your brain. Now, I think they have one part of that study wrong. I think it activates the fight or flight no matter what the screen size is, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree with
that. But so that's one part of the science. And then the other part was that we are not made to be, our bodies are not wired, our minds are not wired to be seeing ourselves when we talk. And it's actually, we are like so highly, finely tuned to just small body motions and inflection and tone. And there's so much, like we're actually extremely advanced communication beings.
Yeah.
And when there is
that little picture staring back at you.
When you're looking at yourself.
A nightmare.
Yeah. And you're like trying to pay attention to everything else. First of all, it's frustrating because it can be glitchy or there's a lull or those types of things. No one speaks and two people try to speak at once. But yeah, just the idea of having yourself that you kind of also have to monitor because you do. What's weird about it is a lot of times you just look at yourself a lot. You know,
you end up doing,
and it's just not how we're made. So it's exhausting for a good reason. I wanted to ask you about... you were mentioning something there that I want to circle back around to.
Just that process
these
of
people and the process.
When they're kind of dug in.
Oh, yeah. Well, there's a couple things there. The dug in, is that generally, I don't want to change or I don't want you to see who I really am?
Could be both. I mean, I think part of the beauty of, one of the big, most helpful things in counseling is just, is self-awareness that you gain, and it's really comes from talking out loud about things and bringing them outside of the invisible space in your head to the outside space where someone else shares it with you. That in and of itself is powerful, so people can do that with their loved ones and their friends, and it's really powerful. And I think sometimes people, they aren't awares, they're unawares of where they're at, so they just don't know to bring things out. They do realize like something's coming, and it either has a name and a face and a date and a time and a situation, and I'm really resistant to it coming out, or it's something that I'm not exactly sure, but I can feel something building in me. Yeah, and they're kind of dug in, trying to hold that back and temper that. So that's why it's a delicate process. You can't. It's jarring enough You know, so being a belligerent counselor is just about the worst thing you can be in terms of being provocative, you know, or moving without some sense of delicacy, you know. Yeah. And I think hopefully wisdom. So that, you know, those are some of the things. But, you know, most people, once they're starting to see things more clearly, they'll come, you know, and we warm to things when we realize someone we can trust them.
Yeah.
They're out for our good. We kind of go down the middle checklist, and it calms our fight or flight down.
Yep.
We realize, like, okay, I can trust this person. They're kind. They've gone really slow with me, and here we are, and we're good. And so you can keep going, you know?
Yeah. I've went to a counselor 2 seasons kind of in my life, and very extremely helpful, very helpful. But, like I would even battle thoughts of like, oh man, can I really say this? You know what I mean? Like he's going to think I'm an idiot. If I say what I'm really thinking here, he's going to just be like, if he doesn't burst out laughing, like afterwards, he's just going to be like, dude, that guy is messed up. You know what I mean? And then I'm like, dude, this guy is paid for this. Like if I can't be totally honest with this guy, who can I be? Like this is his job. You know what I mean?
Bound by law. He can't tell anybody.
Exactly. Do you struggle against that with like earning people's trust? Or do you feel like most people after a session or two, they really get that, hey, this is a very specific thing. I'm not talking to, you know, my uncle here. Like this is a highly trained person and this is a safe space.
I think I'm thankful to say I think most people come quickly to that space with me over the time. But I have certainly had people who were very resistant toward it or who just didn't feel it was working between us and they decided to go elsewhere.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So, I mean, that's just the nature of it. And I tell people that up front, like, hey, look, there's no magic here. I mean, if it's not working between the two of us, you're more than welcome to go find someone else, or I'm happy to help you find someone else.
Oh, okay.
So I just want to deconstruct that as soon as possible. I don't want them thinking that there's anything personal about that. And, I think that was probably one of the things in grad school that was just the art of counseling, the craft of it is something that I didn't know that I was going to learn or need to learn or even hone over the last, 30 years, whatever it's been. And so that part of it has been something that's grown. It's like any other kind of craft. You sort of, you get comfortable in your own skin. You have your own way of doing it. It's not that you've seen everything because you haven't. There's always something that you're just like, wow, that's mind-blowing and difficult or challenging and horrible. I will say one thing about it is there are times when I've had some of my best laughs in the counseling room with people. And I think laughter can be such a disarming and put people at ease,
Yes.
I mean, sometimes our absurdity is just laughable.
Yeah.
And so, when someone shares something and they begin to laugh and you begin to laugh with them, it can really relax people, be like, I know, isn't that so stupid? And you're like, yeah, but that's where we all are,
Yes, totally. So there is something about laughter, sharing a moment. It's interesting you brought that up because I've thought before on the podcast is when I can get to that first moment that I can laugh with someone,
you're like in.
Now we're in.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like we've crossed over, we're good to go.
I used to feel that way preaching sermons sometimes because I felt like there were certain emotional connections that I can make with my congregation in a particular sermon. And if I didn't make those, you felt like in some ways you just were off the whole time.
Yes. It never really quite clicked in.
Yeah. And so I totally, I've had that experience in public speaking, preaching, as well as in the counseling room.
But in the preaching sense, is it laughter you're saying, or it's another,
It can just be that moment where you just dropped in, like, we just met on real human terms.
Yes. And we all know.
Yeah, we all know. Yeah. And sometimes it is laughter,
Yep.
But it's not always that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, what is without giving us all the many years of training and experience, what is some of the science or the art of counseling? when someone's in session, what are you looking for? What are you looking at? Like, what are you thinking as they're talking?
I'm just trying to, I really sit down with a person and I see them and their story, and I appreciate that. Like you were talking about earlier, all of us have this magnificent story, and it's really like starting a movie. You know, it's like someone sits down and they may start in the most tragic part of the story, and then they may rewind and then start telling me from the back to that point, you know?
Yeah.
They may start in the very present tense and tell me, hey, here's what's going on right now, but let me back up now and tell you, you know. So part of it is just, I love story, right? I love fiction. I love movies. I love short stories, and people are stories, essentially. You know, there's a old rabbinic saying that God made people because he loves stories. And everyone who walks in my door has a unique story. And I really am fascinated by that, you know, like just, man, I've got so many stories in my head now, you know,
yeah, I can imagine.
Sometimes I can just sit and think about some of the people I've had the pleasure of meeting and talking to, and just really appreciate that part of it. So there's a posture there. There's a real appreciation there. One of the things, an image that always seems to come to my mind when I think about how I do what I do is the whole idea, like in horse training, where they join up a horse as opposed to break a horse, where instead of like, you know, throwing bags of feed on their back and whipping them until they stop bucking, and then you strap on the saddle really tight and you just subdue them with like sheer force. You know, there's a whole nother philosophy around that, which is where you really join up with the spirit of the horse.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you know anything about that?
Well, I just have read about it.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah. You ever hear the name Monty Roberts?
Yeah.
He was an expert at that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And, you know, that to me is like, there's his story, and there's been a documentary I saw about it, and sort of along the Monty Roberts path was the Robert Redford film many, many years ago. I can't remember the name of it now. It slipped my mind, but he's kind of, I think it's called The Horse Whisperer.
I think I saw it. Yeah.
And he deals with this injured horse.
Okay.
The injured horse is out of pasture. The little girl who was on the horse when it got injured can't ride it because the horse won't let her go near it. They call him in, and there's this whole sequence of him basically just standing in the pasture while the horse stands on the other side of the pasture. And it's just that whole process of them coming closer and closer together.
Yes.
And once he's made that connection with the horse, then he can get that horse back to being what that horse really wants to be, and joins the girl up with him again. That's like a picture for me of the counseling relationship.
Yeah.
You know, is that you really have to just be patient. And the people, we will, once our limbic brain calms down and stops telling us to run for our life or take cover or fight, and we finally realize, like, this person sitting across from me really cares for me and wants what's best for me, I mean, then you really start doing the work. And sometimes that happens in session one. Yeah. And sometimes it takes 4, 5, 6 sessions.
Yeah, I can imagine. How do you know when it's time to give advice and suggestions as opposed to keep asking questions?
It's funny. I had a situation probably about 2 years ago with a couple, and she just out and outright asked me, like, what's your advice on this situation? And I was like, oh, that's an interesting question. And she's like, what's an interesting question? And I was like, you're asking me for my advice. And she's like, well, that's what you do. And I was like, no, it's not actually. I don't offer advice. To me, my advice is like a very particular thing. It's what I give my kids.
Oh, yeah.
You know,
interesting.
But in those times, there is a bracketing, there's a holding back. Like, I've got all kinds of personal thoughts and feelings about what I think you should do in the situation. But that's not necessarily what it is that I'm supposed to be bringing you.
Yes.
And so I have to be really careful with that. There's a little bit of a wall there, a filter.
You find yourself checking that frequently, like you're about to give advice and nope, that's not my job here.
Yeah, just like check it. And so when she just went right up to that door and knocked on it and said, hey, what's behind there?
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, that's interesting. And she's like, well, no, I really want it. And I was like, okay, well, let me think about that. Maybe next time I'll share that with you.
Oh, okay.
So we were kind of at the end of the session and they left. And so that's not something that I always give. So for me, advice is not really, to me, counsel or guidance is more built around the idea like you're on a journey with all your particularities and you're headed somewhere. And you're not here to ask me to necessarily derail that or rethink that. You know, you're going somewhere and I'm here to help you try to find that and get there. Now, if that thing in particular seems particularly dangerous or bad for you, I might intervene there and say, let's think about where it is you're headed.
Yeah.
But most of the time I'm really there as a guide. And if I overplay that and say, I personally don't think you should do that, you know, or stand in their way, it doesn't go very well. And that's assuming a lot about that situation, you know? So for me, it really is like the Monty Williams. You really kind of have to, this horse is different than that horse.
Right.
And it's not going to respond to the same thing. You know? And so you really are kind of feeling it out. You're really trying to read the situation.
So it really is more like making art than checking a list or working a certain formula.
I have a few things that I'm always saying to people, you know, almost, I mean, it is kind of a checklist, like things that I'm always having people do that will help us in that guidance and counsel. But in terms of the particulars of that person's story and where we end up, you know, making connections and drawing insight, you know, it really is different for every person. So I always am telling people like, hey, we're going to work on your story. You're going to work on timelines with me. You're going to need to be doing meditations at least once a day. You're going to need to be, you know, writing in some kind of journal. You're going to need to be walking at the very least and exercising at the very most. You know, there's just some things like, let's just go down the checklist.
I see.
If you come see Chad, this is what I'm going to ask you to do.
Okay.
Because I find these things, doing these things while you're seeing me is going to help the process along.
Yeah, for sure. Meditation. Do you have sort of a favorite form of meditation that you recommend?
The one that I tell everybody to use just because it's so easy is the app on the phone, Headspace.
Oh, okay.
The little orange dots thing. And they just recently added a female's voice to that, but there's a gentleman who started that and he does it's just guided meditation, and it's spiritually speaking, it's agnostic. It's really more about kind of the physicality and the psychology of meditation versus like the spirituality of it. You kind of bring that if you want, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I usually encourage people to do that because most people haven't practiced much of that. And that app is respectful of that and kind of let you start where you are and will sort of educate you as you go.
Yeah.
And I had a guy say to me today, he was saying to me when I was kind of walking through a few things with him, he's like, that's kind of what the guy says on the Headspace app.
Oh, okay.
So we kind of sync up there. I know that he's saying similar things as me.
Yes.
And I him. And so that's where it becomes sort of a helpful thing for that person.
Yeah, that app has been around. I think it's probably one of the more popular ones, and it has been for some time.
Yeah, we have they gave us like a discount code for our clients. So we can, they can get the like an annual subscription to it for a discount. And that's why I tell everybody, like, in our situation, Porter's Collie counseling is free.
Yeah.
And so, I'm like, look, you're getting free counseling. So pay whatever it is, the $80 to do meditation for a year.
Right.
That's money well spent.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
And do donors support Porter's Call?
Yeah. So the industry, basically, the recording industry, and the industry built up around the recording industry and touring industry is the main source of revenue for us.
Okay.
But artists do come back around and give, and which is an amazing thing when that happens. Kind of paying it forward,
Right. Do you do some record labels pay to have their recording artists?
No. So no one pays anything.
Not even the record labels.
No.
Oh, okay.
So if let's say Warner Country says they have a new signee and they say, hey, one thing you should know about is Porter's Call. They do great work. It's free. We support them. Go see them. That's the beginning and the end of that conversation as far as we're concerned.
Okay. But they may donate to you.
They may give.
Yeah.
But
they're not paying per session or anything like that.
They'll give like annually or biannually or something like that.
Because they see the value and they're in the industry and these are kind of their people.
It's
and
their prized possession, right?
Yeah.
Their commodity.
Totally. What do you do with suffering? Like, what is the theology of suffering? Because, man, you must just see, I mean, this is why you have a job, right? This is what you're doing every day, all day. Basically, it's dealing with suffering. A couple of years ago, we were at a different office, and there was a hedgerow right behind the office there, and I was outside, and there was like an apartment complex on the other side of the hedgerow. And kind of like at the same time, I was outside, I could hear a dog barking, and it really sounded like the dog got hit. You know, it went from a bark to, you know what I mean? Like, it really sounded like that dog got hit. And then there was a kid that was getting yelled at, you know, and I hope the kid didn't get hit. But it just occurred to me that, you know, here it is, 3:45 on a random Tuesday afternoon. It's springtime, the sun's shining in my tiny little piece of the world, so small. Like this is these two instances were in earshot, and it was both within the same 5 or 10 minutes of standing out on that back deck at that office, where it sounded like a dog and maybe a child weren't being treated quite properly, and I just it just seemed like
it hurts.
It hurts, and this is just here, and this is probably the lighter kinds of pain that's going on in that town right then in that moment. Like, there's probably much worse things happening. Both of those sounded kind of bad enough, to be honest, but there's probably much worse things happening. But then you extend that to the county and the state and the country and the world. I mean, if you were just to look in on, thank goodness this isn't possible for us, because if you were just to look in on the earth and just see simultaneously all the suffering that's happening at one point on this earth, it would just, man, I don't know how you could handle it.
No,
there would just be so much.
Yeah.
And yet God is in control, you know? God is working a path of redemption, and Christ is king, and good will win in the end, but we're not just sort of like haphazardly hoping for the best until finally good wins. Like, God is in control. But yet there's suffering. Like, how do you deal with that? How do you think about that?
I mean, I guess my first response to that is to just acknowledge it. Just to get to a place with a person where they can acknowledge their suffering and really acknowledge it, really own it, the pain maybe they've been stuffing down, or, the pain that's been sort of chasing them around, whatever, metaphor. But I think first of all, just you kind of have to dare yourself, as a counselor. Like, you just saw them go past that door, as it were, in their story. Are you going to go back and ask them what's behind that door? And if you're not willing to be in the suffering, if you're not willing to look in the suffering with them, then you probably shouldn't do this job, right? So the first thing is just like being present in it. And I think for me personally, see, here's my personal sort of hardwiring, my blueprint, my why, is what you were just saying. It's like, I don't believe in the fate of suffering, the pointlessness of suffering. I believe that writ large, by God's grace, nothing is wasted in our suffering, and He's accomplishing good things. And so, of course, if I'm talking to someone of faith, I can go directly to that place, But the common grace that we have in this world right now, as the sun comes up and goes down, and we have breath in our lungs and companions, and everybody has those things, no matter what their faith perspective is, is that if a person is willing to turn and face their suffering and to deal with it, whatever that means, then and to not just be tormented by their suffering.
Right.
Then they're probably going to see something good come from that. So that's a common grace. That's to me, again, my belief as a Christian is like that's accessible for all human beings on planet Earth.
Mm-hmm.
And you hear people talk like that who aren't people of faith. And you're like, well, yeah, that's for me. That's one of the blessings that we all have. And so of course for the Christ follower, that person really, that's a huge point of understanding, you know. So acknowledging it and believing that if we can at least face it and start talking about it, we can actually begin to speak into this chaos and see something emerge from it. And this is where the artist is such a powerful thing. An artist could be in severe pain between shows and between writing sessions. And to just stop them and say, you realize like when you sing, when you put your pencil to the paper to write that song, when you strum your guitar, you are speaking into that chaos and you're drawing out of it life and you're turning around and giving it to other people. That's really powerful.
Because they're taking their story, which certainly includes suffering, and they're turning it into a beautiful form of art and then sharing it.
Yeah. And everybody in the room is singing with you.
And it wouldn't have been possible without some of that suffering.
No. It would have been impossible. And so, like, there's a lot of hope then in the suffering. Part of the thing with suffering is that the physical nature of how our brain responds to suffering, the fight or flight, you know, mechanism that our brain has. It's that warning system that tells us, hey, things are not good. You need to take cover or get out of here or just freeze. And it takes a while for that system to relax, especially when people have been traumatized, for them to actually work out that order in the chaos. So like a lot of times a person here in town who's just is one of the, it's weird to say this, but she's an expert in trauma care and relief. She has said that it's like, you know, as human beings, we don't like an unfinished story. And trauma really is a story that's not finished or it doesn't make sense to our brains. This isn't the way it's supposed to be, or what in the world happened. And so in counseling, what you're doing is you're going back into those unfinished spaces and you're helping that person to finish that, you know, to see some kind of completion, to get some kind of closure on that.
Interesting.
And to be able to be like, okay, it's not gone. The pain isn't gone, but I'm not suffering as much. I'm not tormented. I'm not haunted. Now I feel like everything has been integrated right here and I'm not a million pieces.
Yeah.
And now I'm moving on again.
Yes.
And so, I mean, as bleak as suffering is just in terms of a big category, once you're willing to get into that space with a person and sit with them in their suffering and be patient, you know, and be okay with all the things they say in their suffering and all the questions they ask and all the accusations they make and all the resentment they feel and the anger, you know, it's like right now, our black and brown friends. I think, you know, these situations that we've currently lived through, the white community does a disservice to our black and brown friends because we reject their suffering.
Yeah.
And the expression of that suffering. We say, you can't suffer that way. That's not real. What you're doing now in response to it's not okay. And you're just prolonging the suffering. You're putting a cleavage between you and them, right? And so to me, like that is God's grace to us and to all of us as a community on planet Earth, is that I can put all that down and walk into that room that's just a mess in your soul. And you know, I don't know if we'll find anything the first day or the second day, but maybe over time we'll begin to put things back to rights, and you know, you will be able to walk out of that room and feel complete and whole.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great Yeah, that idea of we need a narrative, we need context.
Yeah.
The story needs to be resolved. I hadn't thought of it before, but that really stands out to me. I think that's so true.
I mean, we've all been in a movie where the end is just like so like what is going on here?
And it messes you up.
Yeah.
It's like, man, I really would like to have the last 2 hours back and not have this in my head. But then it sticks. It's like then the next day, it's like that just feels so unresolved.
That is a good example of the dynamic in play.
Yeah.
I mean, it makes sense, right? If I can just say this, if let's say that you were sexually abused, if someone you know is sexually abused, or you go through something like that, especially as a child, there's something about that that's just like in your brain just can't compute that.
Right.
And so what happens is people oftentimes carve out other realities in which to psychologically live in so as not to have to sit in that space.
What do you mean?
Well, they have an alternative little world they can live inside of. If I have to go sit down at the table with the person who just abused me, the human mind can't do that. That's not the way we're wired to do that, right? And so I have to go somewhere else inside of me to be able to pull off that huge feat, which is to look across the table at you and pretend that you didn't just do that to me.
Right.
Now, that's a coping mechanism that over time will become like maladaptive. It no longer is working for that person in their adult years. And so you can't fault them at 7 for having that. That was how they survived. But at 27, it's ruining their marriage.
Yes.
You see what I'm saying?
Yep.
And so all that to say is just like being able to get into that space and understand like something hasn't finished here. Something is undone here. The story is not where it needs to be. And to help that person really, come to terms with that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and that's, I think you mentioned our black and brown friends. I think that's important too, because, I mean, you talk about suffering, and it's not just the people that are treated unfairly or killed, but there are our black friends have certain uncertainties and inconveniences and fears that we don't have. And when we, as the white evangelical community, Lincoln, you need something on that computer? Are you good? When we, as the white evangelical community, react in a tone that demands more information or has a interest in getting all of the details just right, and saying, well, but there's always two sides to the story and we should know it all, like if our initial reaction is not based out of some knowledge, which, hey, there's something systemic going on here, it's not right. But if you don't have that, like, can we just start with empathy, and I think that really concerns me, because if I am black or brown myself and my white brothers and sisters, their first reaction is to get the details, whatever it may be, that has to be hurtful.
Oh.
But that's who you are as a person, and then you're going to go with them to church on Sunday.
Yeah.
And that seems like a lot to live with, honestly. How do you deal with that?
Yeah.
So I just think that's a great point, because I do think that our black and brown friends are dealing with more things on a continual day in and day out basis, fears, uncertainties, inconveniences, those types of things that we don't deal with. And so having to have a narrative around that, or even putting that in context, we just need to show them love and support and stand up on their behalf and those types of things. I mean, that can be a small bright spot.
If someone came to my counseling office and started to tell a painful part of their story and they were angry, and I looked at them and said something along the lines of like, man, you kind of seem angry
right
about this. I mean, what's the deal? they'd be like, yeah, I'm angry.
Yeah.
So their response would be like, are you going to tell me not to be this way?
Yes.
I mean, that's going to be the end of that session.
Mm-hmm.
So the human thing, the empathic thing to do is to say, there's a lot of, I mean, obviously you're angry. Tell me more.
Mm-hmm.
I can't imagine.
Mm-hmm.
If I was in your position, I have no idea how I would react.
Mm-hmm.
I'd probably be angry too. So yeah, empathy is just like the basic human element here that oftentimes is lost because of, I think, the social fears and context and who's on which side and what labels.
Yeah.
It's like, just get to know a brother or a sister who are being racially profiled and let him tell you about what it's like to drive past a police car as a black man in a white community. He is afraid. Mm-hmm. And you're going to tell him that he shouldn't be? I mean, that's just not even good human practice.
Yeah. Well, I think it's born out of ignorance. I think there's a lot of people that don't understand how prevalent this is, and that these are still. I mean, I had someone text me after the George Floyd incident and ask if he knew I was sort of interested in this particular area, and wondered if we just so happened to hear about some of the instances that involve black or brown people, but maybe the incidences are happening at equal rates with white people. And so it was great. I was glad he texted me, because he had a question. Like, that question still exists out there, which is hard to believe in 2020 with everything going on, that there would be still some people that might question whether the black and brown friends are being treated less fairly than white people. But it's like, it's so statistically proven at this point. Like, we need to do something about it, and at the very least we need to stand up for them, and share their suffering the best that we can along with them.
Well, if they suffer in this way, like, that's, to me, is like, if our collectiveness, around this issue isn't more connected, if we don't really see, like, if you suffer here, I suffer here,
right,
then we're never going to get this right. If we think it's their problem, and I hope you guys figure that out, we're screwed.
Yes, I totally agree. And TJ, this past Sunday, mentioned something related to Christian persecution that I'd never heard before. I actually never thought of, and it made so much sense. Like, it finally clicked for me. I actually finally get the verse that talks about, if you're a Christian, you will receive persecution. Yeah. Well, I've not received persecution. Like, I could go, we could talk about, but if you weren't a Christian, you could do things in business a certain way, or you could do, and you can't because, you're a person of faith. I don't know. I'm not sure if I quite buy that that's persecution. There are brothers and sisters that are being actively, physically persecuted, tortured, lives taken. And if we believe that we are the body of Christ, if there's any Christian anywhere in the world right now being persecuted, then we, the collective we, the body we are experiencing persecution. And if you don't think that you are, then logically we're saying we're not part of the body. And so that clicked for me.
Yeah, that was really powerful.
Yeah, and so I just thought of that with you mentioning this is our problem. These are our brothers and sisters. This is our issue together. This is not their problem.
No. That's the heart of the part of the real
it
issue.
Really is.
Yeah.
I mean, I think actually if there's greater responsibility, it's absolutely on us.
Absolutely.
If you happen to be white, because that is the majority. And so I think we have an extra responsibility here. I
think the scripture says too much is given. We have a lot, and we've been given a lot through the system, partly a racist system. We're several generations into our wealth as white people, and so in power, and I'll say it, privilege, and we have a responsibility with that to do something with that, and to only use it as a weapon or as a divisive thing.
Yeah.
To say us and them is really a misuse of that
a
gift, I think.
I totally agree. How do you, I don't know, contextualize or deal with these things? When the Ahmaud Arbery video came out, that was my day. I just, it was just, the reaction was, oh dear God, not again. Are you serious? And that video is just so awful.
It's awful.
That was very all-consuming. So for me, I'm having a hard time doing anything other than kind of two options. One, just ignore it and try to be productive with what I had planned for that day or whatever, which sounds weird to say it out loud, but super self-serving. But for me, it's too easy to either just ignore it or to just be all-consumed. And I'm having a hard time in the middle. And then
I feel that way a lot of times. If I can just say, like, when I'm with people in a counseling setting, we often have to end our counseling sessions, and often it's awkward and like, hey, we've got to be done right now. And then you have to wait, like 7 days. 10 days before you pick up the conversation again. So you're just kind of leaving people in this undoneness. And I feel that way about these issues. And again, I don't like that feeling. That's a humanly speaking, that's a very our primal instinct goes against that. We want to finish things and move on.
Yes.
But this is an issue, as is oftentimes on a micro level with people, issues that take time. And you sort of, well, that whole thing is just a big mess sitting right there, but I've still got to get in my car and go to work. I've got to come,
Yeah.
For me, I think for me, like the way that we've tried, I know you had Brad and Anthony on here. Yeah. So like Tuesday night, several black families and white families sat down together and just shared a meal and talked. And just, just talked about it. Because that's better than sitting in silence, isolated.
Yes.
So we just built bridges and turned up the volume with each other and just let people be angry and sad and tell stories, and we laugh together. And so that feels better to me than just watching CNN,
Yes, 100%.
So that's, I guess that's me sort of, and us in that way, trying to bring some order out of the chaos.
Yeah, certainly. Going back to suffering just for a little bit, I was thinking too that because there are theological camps that don't have a place for suffering, that, God wants only our good, and to the extent that which he does, but to the extent that we experience hardship or suffering, that somehow slipped through the hands of God, and it's unfortunate, that God can't fix those things, and it's happening, and God doesn't want it that way, but he's going to allow it. And, God does work things for our good, but it does include suffering.
Yeah.
And it's one of the reasons, if you think that there's so much suffering, but then there's also so much good simultaneously. It's one of the reasons, it's one of the cases for the church. Like, we have the church sprinkled throughout communities around this country and around the world, and we need a lot more of them.
Yeah.
And then as we're out, because this is what struck me, is you are basically taking I think of it just like a micro approach to alleviating suffering. Like, it's one-on-one. You know what I mean? Like, you might help 4 people in a day or 6 people in a day. There's thousands and thousands and millions of people in this country, but 4 or 6 of them that get in contact with you are going to their suffering is going to be alleviated a little bit. And so, like, you're fixing suffering one person at a time, one meeting at a time, one prayer at a time, that type of thing. And so that does, and you're not the only one, you know what I mean? And then there's pastors, and then there's believers talking to their neighbors, and then there's a friend that has an encouraging word. And so there's all these bright spots too, simultaneously with the suffering. I guess it just speaks to the fact that God has a reason for the Christians being everywhere. We're supposed to be the salt of the earth.
Yeah.
and we're supposed to be, that bright spot in and amongst the suffering. But even the suffering produces beauty. That's what really stuck out to me too. You mentioning like these artists, they're creating this beautiful art, but it was born out of their suffering. So we don't get one without the other.
I love the fact that what the enemy meant for evil or bad is turned into good.
Yeah.
And even in this world, and again, we're living in this sort of era of common grace. All of us are showered with God's blessings, no matter what walk of life we have. And so you see people dancing on their graves, as it were, the suffering. And that to me is just, it's probably one of the reasons why I like my movies a little moodier and darker. I like my music that way.
Okay.
I prefer I know that my wife sometimes gives me a hard time about it. Like, God, it's such a depressing movie. Like, why do you want to see that? Or that song, that's so, and I think part of it is because even in that dark space like that, whether it's a film or a book or a song, I enjoy seeing a person take those really dark textures and make, tell a story or produce a song or write a book. It's just, it just really speaks to me, and I have no idea. To me, in the world of, like, to your point earlier, people who are talking about what God really, somehow or another, like the only thing God, allows in your life is like good things, or else you're doing something wrong.
Mm-hmm.
I have no idea what to do with that. To me, it's just, that is so far away from in terms of the really pure form of that, kind of theological expression.
Yeah.
From reality, when you sit across from somebody in deep suffering, it's not even, it's just arcane. It's just it's a non-starter for me.
Mm.
I wrestle more with people around the idea of, like, where is God in the suffering, as opposed to people coming in saying, I thought if I did X, Y, and Z, that I would live inside of all this, wealth, and God, that's all God wants from me is wealth and health and prosperity. That doesn't come in as often and sit across the table from me, as much as maybe a subtler version of that, which is, where is God in the suffering? If God is all loving and all kind, why are people suffering the way they are?
Yeah.
And, on that note, I will say one thing I have done, given my sort of my job, and I'm tuned into things that are maybe sometimes more painful and difficult to hear. I have read recently a couple of different books and articles about the progress that we've made as a human society.
Oh.
And like, we are better off than we were 50 years ago, 150 years ago.
Oh my goodness, yeah.
And so to me, like, I take great hope in that. Like, I think it's N.T. Wright that said, the day that tomb emptied, the world was getting better and better.
Yes.
And, like, to me, that is true. In spite of and despite the suffering, it's all moving toward, toward that point.
Yes.
And so that is true.
Yes.
And so I guess for me, it's like, I do take great comfort in, like, as much as I want to be in the suffering with people, acknowledge it, that came up in our discussion Tuesday night with our Black friends is, my grandparents never sat in a room like that and had that conversation.
That's a good point.
I mean,
that's a good point.
No one was talking in those nuances.
Yeah.
In that generation.
Yep.
And so to me, that's like that's a good thing. And there's some hope in that.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. The, when you mentioned the non-starter, what were you referring to there? Cause I think there's a camp that would say, well, God is good. God loves us. God would never bring suffering into our life deliberately because a father who would do that to his son would go to jail.
Right.
I think that's immediately that's a red flag for me because God is not a earthly father times 10. He's not a really good dead. He is God. So that's an indication that we have a small view of God.
Yeah.
I think that's thing one. They're saying, God would never do this. But then there's the other side where God is in control of all things. And I just don't know, like it's either God is working it out, including the suffering in our life for a greater good, or I guess their version would be God can stop it, but he's not going to. So he's going to sit on the sidelines. And if he could stop it, but doesn't, he chooses not to involve himself in those things and just kind of let it play out. Well, a God that's capable, but restrains himself is still sort of incapable. You know what I mean? So, I think
it's at least intolerable to believe that. It seems almost intolerable to believe that God could, but he's not.
Right, but a lot of people do believe that, though.
I'm just saying, I think from the human perspective, they think, well, if you can, then you always should.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
That's that. Our human perspective, reversing that is like, well, if you have the might, it always is right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so if God has that ability,
yes,
then it only makes sense that he would do something about it. For him not to is intolerable to me.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Is this what you were talking about when you said it's a non-starter for you?
No, I'm saying like I was thinking more in terms of like people who come from like a health and wealth prosperity gospel.
Gotcha.
Coming in and saying, this is where I'm at.
Yeah.
Help me find my way out of that. That doesn't come into my office very often.
I see.
This struggle though, these things like this,
yeah,
these textures and difficulties definitely do. And, it's a real thing. And again, man, you talk about like being in a space where you don't have at a level and a depth where you don't have good answers to questions.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, as a counselor, when someone's talking in those terms about who God is and why he isn't intervening in suffering, I've done a fair amount of studying, but it's not like I'm sitting there with, flashcards of answers.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, I'm just down in the submarine with them.
Yeah. Yep.
And we're way down there.
Yeah.
And I'm just, I'm thinking, I'm just going to be present with this person.
Yes.
And I honestly don't know if they ask me directly what I think. I'm going to be honest at any given time as much as I can. But my point is really just to be present with them in that place.
Yes.
And so my other theological understanding is that in me being present in your life, I am representing the presence of God in some small little way.
Yes.
You know, and I can't speak to the bigger picture.
Right.
But at my touch point here, I'm just going to be faithful in that.
Yes, totally. Yeah. I'm just so grateful that God is in control and nothing happens in my life without him making it happen, him orchestrating it, him approving it, like these types of things. And I'm so glad that God doesn't sort of, so to speak, sit on the sidelines in certain areas of our life.
There's no comfort in that for me either.
There's no comfort in that for me because now as it relates to some suffering or salvation or what these types of things where God's not going to involve himself, oh my goodness, talk about pressure, like, oh man, we've got to really like figure this out for ourselves then because God's not going to involve himself in these particular areas of my life. But that's also sort of idolatrous, because there's no part of our life or human experience that God does not involve himself in. And our issue is not that God has involved himself. Our issue is that we're not letting God involve himself nearly enough, so I'm glad that God is in control. That's great comfort to me. I just don't get comfort with theology that, we're kind of out here on our own in certain areas of our life.
Yeah.
It is Friday afternoon. I'm going to have some of this Buffalo Trace. Do you want any?
Sure, man.
All right.
Love to.
I want to ask about pastors.
Okay.
You've been a pastor. You've counseled pastors. Yeah. What's it like to be a pastor?
It's the hardest job that a person could do.
Really?
I think it is. I mean, and I haven't done every job. I didn't do the TV show Dirty Jobs,
Yeah.
But like, in terms of like being a counselor, I worked in a residential treatment facility with teenage boys at one time in my training. I've done some dirty physical labor jobs. I've done fundraising.
Cheers.
Cheers. I've done a lot of different things, but I think being a pastor maybe is one of the hardest jobs there is to do.
Wow. Why?
So I just have I think with every day that passes that I'm no longer in that role, I have a deeper appreciation for my friends who do that. And man, why? I
can think of a few reasons. But I've not been a pastor, so I'd love to hear your thoughts.
I mean,
you got extra insight too because you've counseled pastors.
It's hard to know where to begin with that one. I think one of the things that it's difficult to do is to feel like when you're in a room with your members and people that you attend church with, and whatever issue is coming to the surface, whatever conversation, it's really hard not to feel like you're supposed to have an answer for everything. That's so tiring.
Really? Now, are you talking about just theological discussions or just anything?
I guess anything, but
okay.
Definitely theological ones. I mean,
you're the guy who's supposed to know.
Yeah, just constantly. If you just don't have a lot of opportunities to say, I just don't know. I'm not sure. I think probably the best and most seasoned pastors and leaders, find it within them to be able to say that. And when they do, if they do it, well and with a balance of strength and humility, it's really compelling, and you want to follow that person to wherever they go. But it's just really, it's a heavy burden to sit in spaces with people and just be on all the time like that. Like we were over at our friend's house Tuesday night having dinner with all those people. I still, because I did that for a long time, I still really am grateful to be able to sit in the corner of that room and no one in that room is expecting me to be the pastor who's going to wrap this up and summarize and pray over, Yeah. I am very grateful for that space. I'm grateful for people who do that.
Yeah.
But I'm grateful to live in this space that I'm in right now.
Interesting.
So that's definitely one of them.
That is not one I would have thought of. The kind of the need to have the answers, but I could totally see it.
It's kind of a leadership thing.
Sure. Yeah.
I mean, you kind of live in that space where you're like, if you're running the board meeting, they're all eventually going to look down there at you and be like, all right, man.
Yeah. It's true, and yet it's a little bit different than, say, a business type setting, because in a business, as a leader in business, if you have competent people that are kind of the layer under you, it's great to get the collective intellectual knowledge from those people, and you might make the decision. But that's different though, because the pastor, he's the one that he has the PhD. So what do you got for us? You know what I mean? One thing that seems difficult to me is the weekly cadence, the building up to weekend preaching, and then that drop off, and then getting back into the week. So the weekly cadence, and then also the and just with the weekly cadence, it's just the spikes. Like the service times. There's so much happening in that 1 hour or hour and a half or whatever that you've spent so much time preparing for.
Yeah.
So the spikes, and then also the dual sort of, and maybe this is not the case. Well, this probably is the case for every pastor, but the two sides of the brain, like the study, the preparing for sermons, that type of thing, and then also the administration. The leadership stuff. One of them. The organization that needs to go, and man, it's so hard to flip back and forth from those
both
two.
Of those people, like a sage, kind of wise, contemplative person.
Yeah,
and like CEO. Marketing kind of leadership guru person.
Yeah.
I mean, that's not a same person.
No, it's not.
Two very different kinds of brains.
Yeah, 100%.
And so, I mean, and of course, guys get to certain points where they're either seasoned enough and and have enough experience where they know, like, hey, that's not my thing. I don't do that. This is what I do.
Yeah.
Or they are in large enough context with enough resources where they can just stay in their lane.
Yeah.
Right? Because there's so many team members around them. But when you're planting, when you're starting, when it's small, man, the pressure that my brothers and sisters live under in those contexts is real.
Yeah.
It's real.
Can you imagine?
And I was on a little video chat with some pastors down in Houston last week and just talking to them about, taking care of themselves as they begin to move out of this video preaching mode into like being in the same space again and having people in your congregation who are wearing masks, who are, versus those aren't. It's real. It's not real, the pastor in that spot.
Oh, that's difficult.
I mean, you're just, you just feel like I can't win for losing here.
Exactly.
And that's just really, that is what I was telling these guys. That is stress. And you have to deal with that. Your body is going to have a physical reaction to this stuff. And if you're not replenishing it physically, you're on a limited run. That edge of that cliff is coming. And you may not make it through the summer. So you need to really be giving yourself this space. That the way I dealt with those spikes eventually in my time as a pastor is I lived inside of a routine, and it was like come hell or high water. I wasn't going to veer out of it. And I just told the people around me, like, I'm going to be on and accessible when I'm here and doing my thing, but I live inside of this kind of space. And it's what I found that really helps me to sustain the pace and to be at a place where I need to be for the job. And so that's how I kind of, navigated that eventually, is being able to live there.
So was that more about the schedule or about when you're off and don't contact me?
It was a little bit of all, both. Yeah, both.
Okay.
And like how I took care of my body, and being, what does being available mean and to whom?
Yeah.
I think too with like the preaching, different seasons require different sorts of input there and effort. But I think once you kind of begin to really hit your stride and you've been at this for a while, the amount of time that you need to spend every week to prepare for the sermon may not be as much, you're pouring yourself into other areas maybe, but early on it may be a lot, when you're establishing yourself or you're planting, you may actually end up spending a lot of time and it, it just, sometimes it's not sustainable. If you have to have, 15 hours a week to prepare for a sermon, that may not be doable always. And if you can't bend and flex there, you're going to be in trouble.
In other words, sometimes maybe you can't get the 15 hours?
Yeah, sometimes you're going to be able to get that much time.
Oh, okay. Well, that was a low.
Yeah, well.
That was a low. I thought you were going to go the other way on that. I mean, can people prepare a good sermon in 15 hours?
I think it depends.
Okay.
I mean, I think some guys have been at it long enough where, you could just say to them, this is kind of the focal point.
Yeah.
And I need for you to preach, and they've either taught on that before, and it's so deeply in them, that they can do that without much direct preparation on that topic.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah.
Now, there's different services that pastors, some guys they'll hire people to do their research. So if there's 5 books to read for a series in the fall, they'll hire. There's a company I know in Austin that does a thing where they have people who will read all your books for you and write summaries for you. And so, the reason why they're doing that is because they're trying to get that time down.
Right. Yeah.
To be at the level that they expect themselves to be at, and their congregation has come to expect them to be at, is unreasonable if they just had to do it on their own.
Right.
So they have to offload some of that to other people.
Totally. Be kind of a fun job. Read books for money.
Yeah, and write summaries and outlines. Yeah.
Well, it'd be an important job too, because you need to get the best parts of that book, and make sure they get that. What were some of your favorite parts and least favorite parts of being a pastor?
I mean, some of my favorite parts, like I said earlier, is just being with people in their life and, in the real places and really giving them the permission and the ownership of the ministry of the local church and seeing them, do it and stepping back. I mean, that definitely was some of the best things. And, being with people in those hard times, that definitely is, I mean, that's sacred ground.
Yeah.
When they open the door of their home to you in the midst of their suffering from loss of a family member or something, that's hard, but it's good. Leading people through change, congregations, where failure seems imminent and by some standards is a reality.
Yeah.
But helping them navigate that to like helping a congregation find the place that they need to be at during that season and really embrace it. I mean, I love doing that. Kind of being the fixer. Like Harvey Keitel in Pulp Fiction, he comes in and like cleans up things and gets things put back together.
Yeah, as long as you're not in that season for too long.
No, you don't want to be in that season for too long. But there is a special, that's a unique space to be with a congregation. It's not unlike being a counselor when you're sitting with an individual, helping them realize like things have changed and I've got to get my heart and mind and soul wrapped around that.
Yeah.
I mean, it's very much like that. It can be painful.
Yeah.
So like those are some of my, preaching. I loved preaching. Eventually, you get to where it really becomes kind of not a grandstanding moment, but a moment where everything kind of comes together and you can kind of address everyone, and be in a dialogue, a deep dialogue. You feel like you've started something at the beginning of your time with the congregation, and it's ongoing. It's not Sunday by Sunday, but it's like this. We started this conversation ever how many years ago, and we're just having it. Like
interesting.
Like with Ray, that's I felt like with Pastor Ray, as I got to sit underneath his preaching weekly toward the end of his time at Emmanuel. I mean, I just felt like I was in a conversation with him.
Yes, it did feel that way, although it never occurred to me.
And he's like speaking directly to, and it's, I'm writing things down and mulling over them or listening on the podcast,
Yeah.
And I just think that speaks volumes to his preaching abilities. But I also think it says a lot about who he is as a man and his willingness to kind of occupy that space and to create it and to be in it and serve in that space. And there's a lot of, I didn't feel like I needed his time at breakfast or coffee or he was much demanded and sought after. I was more than happy to sit in that room with him on Sunday morning. And I think TJ, at Emmanuel, I think he's walking right inside those footsteps. He started a conversation back there, in September that's going to go now for a really long time with those people who join up with him there. And that's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, it is a beautiful thing, and I can see it. But, man, I'm sort of embarrassed. Like, I never thought of it in those terms. But you're so true. I mean, Ray was a master at that. What are the necessary components to make it be a conversation together as opposed to one-off services, one-off sermons?
Man, it's like one thing is that he was never in a hurry. I didn't feel like he was in a hurry. The first time I came to Emmanuel and he did that invocation to all who are weary, and need rest. I mean, the way he would just go through that so slowly every Sunday. I mean, it just stopped me dead in my tracks.
Yeah, me too.
I'm moving at a really high rate of speed, and then boom, I just slam into that.
Yes.
And fall apart.
Yeah.
And just be like, oh, yeah, right, this is where I need to be. I think he's not in a hurry. I don't think he's trying to change anybody. You can't force the soul of a community. Henri Nouwen said, you can only create conditions for redemption. And I think like that, like when a person comes to your house, I can't force good communion there in my home, but I'm going to create space and I'm going to be hospitable and we're going to sit and really enjoy each other's time and space, So I think those are two things. I never felt like Ray was forcing it, nor did I feel like he was in a hurry, and it just really put me at ease.
So do you think it has more to do with the mannerisms than the subject matter? In other words, what I'm not hearing you say is make sure in every sermon that you reference something from last week or last month. It's not even about that?
No. I don't think it's
aside from having a wise schedule for your sermons, and people aren't all going from all over the place every weekend, but so have a wise preaching schedule.
Yes.
But then it's the conversation being carried from week to week and month to month is more about the mannerisms.
I think it's more. It is a soft skill, or it's not a mechanism. I don't even think it's necessarily something that you're taught. Like in a preaching class, I think it's ultimately something that you really have to grow into, and recognize. And, I think when you're early on, you have so much you need to say.
Okay.
You got points you got to make. Okay. And there's a lot of force there. Yeah. And that's still being a shepherd. There, your rod and your staff, they comfort me. So there is definitely the poking and the prodding along, right? Yeah. But when someone like Ray is making you lie down in green pastures, and you're like, he just took me down, and I didn't feel harassed. Yeah. Yes. He just took me out. Yep. With that kind and strong word. I mean, that's not something you can teach somebody. That comes with time for the person who's willing to learn and grow. And Ray's been through a lot. He struggled in his role as a pastor. And, if you haven't failed or struggled, you probably aren't going to learn those lessons. Yeah. Yeah, I was going to say, too, I think it's more than time. I think time can definitely be helpful. And yet there are preachers that have had plenty of time that don't have it. So it's got to be more than time. Suffering maybe is a key component there, or helpful component. Yeah. What's worked? What did you find that worked well with communication in the preaching form? Or even to put it another way, and you can talk to both of them, but other specifics about what you found so compelling about Ray's communication? Because, we've talked about it before. Yeah. It is compelling. Yeah. There's something there. There's a gravitas to it. And you're right. He's not in a rush. He has sort of a master on the English language. He's very well prepared. Extremely well prepared. I dare say, I never saw his notes, but it looked like he was almost reading them verbatim. Oh, he does every sermon. So it's word for word. That's that's extraordinary. Like the level of, that's what I'm saying, that digestion at that level, to be able to sit down and get that out of you onto paper and be that way on a Sunday morning. That's not a guy who's just appropriating ideas and reading a book here or there, doing some research. That's a guy who's it is churning up in him and out of him into a congregation. And that to me is what a shepherd is. Yeah. As much as it is like a teaching pastor. Yeah. Yeah. I would at times really struggled, in the preaching place, because I would feel maybe really good about something I was doing, but would get feedback sometimes that it wasn't good. And that's of course really difficult to take. And okay, wow, I thought that was so good. And yet somehow it didn't land. It didn't really hit people the right way or whatever. And trying to really hone in on that and figure that out. And some things that I think are fantastic to read or to go through or talk about isn't always really helpful to the people in front of me, and learning that, So there's some mechanics there that you have to subject yourself to. And that's really important. I'm sure Ray's done that and TJ does that, in our context at Emmanuel. But that was definitely, you really have to be if you're faking it, on Sunday morning, that game's going to run out really quickly.
Yeah. Faking a spiritual life, a belief in the message, faking a conviction.
Yeah, if you're not in it, like if you're not being impacted by the gospel in your own life, one of two things is going to happen. You're going to become insanely successful for all the wrong reasons and never look back. And then you're really in danger. There's a lot of big churches and a lot of pastors with a lot of notoriety who aren't in it. That's a dangerous place.
Mm-hmm.
Or you're going to just have a magnificently spectacular failure.
And
it's just going to careen out of control. But there won't be like a middle ground there. Because you can't take it.
Yeah.
It'll eat your lunch.
Huh.
You know what I'm saying?
So it's important to be rooted and grounded in the Word.
I mean, when I got out of the pulpit, a few years ago and came up here to do this work, I was like, okay, well, there's this moment where you're like, I'm no longer reading scripture at any portion of my day to prepare for a sermon on Sunday. So I had to be reminded of like why I loved the text and why it meant so much to me. And I needed to hear the gospel. And so I've just tried to keep it in a steady flow in my life. I'm not presenting sermons anymore. I'm not preaching sermons, but just reading the Psalms and then flipping over and reading something in the New Testament. Maybe, I took a lot of time when I first got done just going back through and reading real carefully through the book of Romans, or Genesis, and just kind of immersing myself back into that and just saying, I need this,
Yeah. Do you miss it?
I do miss it. I mean, every once in a while I'll get a chance to do it or preach or teach even.
Okay.
But at times I do miss it, but I understand what it means to take it on and all that comes with it. And I honestly don't miss that. I really feel at home with where I'm at. With Porter's Call now.
Yeah. How can people best support their pastor or pastors? Do you have some ideas around that? Because I think that's super important.
Yeah.
I think it's probably safe to say being a pastor is a little bit more of a thankless job than it should be.
Yeah. I remember there were certain people that I really believed were praying for me and my family, and they really deeply cared for me in that space, and that always meant a lot to me. They weren't necessarily at all the meetings or, serving on everything, doing everything, but they'd always make it a point somehow to communicate that to me. And that really did mean a lot to me. People to love my family well as a pastor, if you'll love my wife and kids well and respect their space, that means a lot to me. I think most pastors would agree with that. And give me the grace and the space to trial and error, to fail.
Okay.
I didn't get it right. And don't put me on the head of that pen and make me dance that awful dance, but let me fail. Let me fall off there.
I see.
And pick myself up,
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Because that's like, that to me is the worst thing, is that the congregation sets the pastor up for you can't fail. I can't tolerate that. And the pastor sets himself up for that. A really successful pastor is a really lousy version of Jesus. So even at our very best, we stink.
Yeah. Yeah. You're humans.
We're humans.
You're a guy.
You're just,
you have hopes and fears and dreams and talents and weaknesses and the whole nine.
It's like so the best thing to do is to allow all of that to come to bear.
Yeah.
And like Paul says, therefore I rejoice in my weaknesses. Because when I'm weak, he's strong.
Yes. Yeah.
So it's not about putting forth my best version of myself.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. I want to get your thoughts on that, by the way, how long were you a pastor? How many years was that?
Well, I got to Houston in 1990.
Okay.
And at that real basic, kind of youth intern level, started serving in churches. And over the span of time from 90 until 2017, when we moved up here.
Okay.
I had been on staff at a couple different churches. I'd been a part of planting probably 3 churches. And then during that time, that parallel universe started where we started this organization called Better Days that serves the needs of pastors and their families through counseling and support. And that's still going on down there in that region.
Yep.
And so that was kind of paralleling my work. And then right before I came up here, I was at a church for almost 6 years as the senior pastor. And that was a church that I led through a lot of change.
In Houston, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So and on that spectrum of that time, lots of different kinds of churches.
Oh yeah?
Yeah, I'm a little bit of a, Heinz 57, as we say, or just kind of hound dog. Like I grew up in a Baptist tradition, but I think I look and feel more like a Presbyterian now.
Yeah.
But along the way, I have been a part of a lot of different people and contexts. And
okay.
Yeah. So, it is just what it is. It's
for sure. Well, that's shaping too, I'm sure.
That has been huge.
And I think there's some value in that too, because you got to experience different viewpoints and different experiences and theologies probably even. And
yeah.
So yeah, that's...
I wouldn't trade it. Shaping. I wouldn't trade it now for anything.
I would think. Yeah. You mentioned your routine. I wanted to circle back around to that because you mentioned it with both now how you handle the stress with counseling, and it's how you handled the stress and demands of being a pastor. Is the routine the same? What is your routine? Very similar. Okay, what is that?
I usually try to get going earlier in the morning, which means, by some people's standards, it's not early, but I try to wake up no later than 6.
Okay.
And I'll sit there and kind of collect myself for about an hour.
Okay.
Yeah. And then
Are you reading?
I'll read, and I'll maybe for a minute just catch up on the news overnight.
Okay.
And then I'm like reading and praying. And sometimes journaling. Somewhere after that, I'm off. I'm going to work out somehow. We have a gym in our house. I'll go lift and work out or run or ride. And so I'll do that. And then
every morning?
Every morning except for Sunday usually. Sunday mornings usually get up about the same time.
Okay.
And then and I have kind of similar about an hour time, and then usually about an hour to hour and a half, Meeka, my wife, and I will go take the dog for a walk,
Oh, okay.
And just talk and enjoy a quiet Sunday morning together, and then eventually start getting ready to go to church or be home at church.
Yeah.
So Sunday is not I will sometimes later in the day go for a bike ride.
Oh yeah?
Yeah, but normally Sunday is definitely I don't try to do that as much. Yep. Yeah.
And on the other days when you are doing exercise, did you mention how long?
Yeah, I'll go it's usually all in for an hour.
Okay.
I plan for an hour.
Yep.
So it's either I'm either riding and running and stretching, and that's an hour, or I'm like warming up and lifting and doing that for an hour, And then by the time 9:00 rolls around, my first client's walking in the door.
Okay.
And then usually around either 4:30 or 5:30, depending upon the 4 to 6 people, my last client, I'm done with my last client. And at that point, I'm usually either finishing up notes and trying to get home as quickly as possible, because the evening is usually spent just now. Our kids are mostly grown. We have one, she just graduated from high school.
Congratulations. This year, right?
Yeah. And so she's our last one at home, and so our evenings are she's not demanding of our attention and time. Right. Quite the contrary.
Yeah.
So, that's usually Meeka and I just figuring out like stuff around the house or hanging with the neighbors or,
okay.
So it's pretty I usually like that quiet space, especially during the week.
Yeah.
So Saturday morning, Sunday morning, from basically August until May is Premier League soccer.
Okay. And that you work your schedule around that?
I mean, I do record a lot of games.
Do you really?
Yeah, and watch a lot of games.
Have you always been into soccer?
My kids all played.
Okay.
And so the boys, my oldest is almost 25, so watching him play from an early age until, yeah. And then Amy played, and our middle son Noah played. So watched a lot of soccer
and they're
live.
good, right? I mean,
they were great. They played. They
heard
played
Amy's
really good.
Let's be honest. Amy's one of the better ones on the team, right?
Well, she was. She graduated in with all district honors as a defender. So.
Oh wow.
Yeah, she definitely did really well.
Yeah.
As a high school player, and the boys played at a really high level and did well. So we just picked up a team along the way, and we're huge Liverpool fans. So that's definitely a Saturday, Sunday, kind of thing.
But they wouldn't play more than one game on a weekend, would they?
No, but they either play Saturday morning or Sunday morning.
Oh, okay, got it. So it's either going to be a Saturday or Sunday.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's recording the other games as well, though, a lot of times. So I'll fast forward at least through and watch highlights.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Yeah, so that's definitely, I have to admit, that's definitely one of my weekend rituals and routines.
Oh yeah, that's great. I think it's good to have those.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And we love to watch, movies together, and we're currently watching The Office all the way through.
Oh, nice.
During the pandemic, and laughing our full heads off. And,
you and Meeka and Amy?
Yeah, Amy's watched them all at least once.
Okay.
And so now Meeka and I are finally watching them all the way through.
Oh man, so great. We did that. We finished probably 3 or 4 months ago. But there's just not another show like it.
Oh my gosh. It's so there's so many times you're just cringing. You're just like, oh gosh, I can't believe this is happening.
Yeah, it is. But I just think the writers of that show are just masters.
Yeah,
just masters at their craft.
Yeah, that was pretty entertaining. It's pretty entertaining.
Yeah, it is.
So we try to, we enjoy grilling and making yummy food and, going on hikes on the weekends if we, want to, and doing things like that. So that's all part of the routine for me,
Yeah.
I love working around my house and taking care of the place, doing that kind of stuff. So I obviously don't know a ton about that kind of stuff, and so I kind of learn as I go. But I'm not afraid of trying it,
What are some of the most important aspects of that routine? Is it the exercise?
That's a huge
or the
part
reading?
of it. It's all. I'd say that morning part is really important.
That morning part, okay.
Yeah, so that kind of getting my soul ready to engage the day, and then get my body, ready to do that too.
Yeah.
Is hugely important. I mean, honestly, for me, like, I always tell everybody, like, all the exercise I do is all geared around, I want to get on the bike, whether it's a mountain bike or a road bike, and go for a ride and just lose myself. So, I mean, that's really what it's all about, is just staying in shape so I can do that.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's what you love. That's riding the bike.
Yeah. So, like, out here, I can leave my house and be at the Natchez Trace, within 10 miles.
Do you ride your bike out to the Natchez Trace?
Yeah. And
is there a safe way to get there?
Yeah. From where I live. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And then you get up on the trace, and it's like you have full right of way as a bicyclist.
Yeah, you do. Yeah.
And you can go either to Leaper's Fork.
Yep.
Or I can go back to the ride and go up toward like Loveless Cafe and work my way back up that. So I mean, it's just breathtaking.
Yes, it really is. It's so beautiful. Parenting. I won't keep you much longer because I know you're probably shot for the week. But parenting. How do you do it?
Simple question.
I mean, you guys really seem like really great parents.
Man.
I mean, your kids have turned out exceptionally well. Just from what we know about you and Meeka, what have been some of the things, that you've tried to always do with the kids, or some of the habits maybe when they were all at home? Like,
keeping it real.
Okay.
I mean, I always wanted to end up in this place where I'm friends with all three of the kids.
Oh, yeah. Oh, man. Me too.
Yeah. So it's like, I feel like I am.
Yeah.
And they're all very different, and that's amazing. But yeah, just feeling like if I could get to the point where when they're, 18, 19, mid-20s, if I could be friends with them and enjoy things with them, and that would be the goal. So I feel like that we're getting close to that. I mean, we are there essentially with Amy. She's graduating and leaving next fall, God willing. She's going to go off to school. So being friends, keeping it real, having dinner together, always making time for that table. Talking about everything, on the radio, in the news, in the movie, talking about the big ideas, the absurd ideas, and that's really where I would say the more direct discipleship, teaching them the gospel, the truth, as we believed it to be revealed in Scripture and through Christ, is really taking the opportunity that life presents to you to teach those things as much as it is about setting aside a space to do that. Yeah, it's like on the way as we go. I'm gonna stay connected with you, and I'm gonna say, hey, you see that over there? Let's think about this for a second.
I see.
Let's talk about this.
Yeah. As
opposed to like, okay, everybody sit down, sit in this space. I mean, we did that some, but not much.
Okay. Yep.
We tried to appropriately talk about things with them as they matured. So not too much too soon, but totally not withholding. They saw me as a pastor, they saw me as a counselor, and I would talk about what I could in front of them.
Yeah.
The good, the bad, and the ugly. We laughed together, we gave space for them to wander. Still do. I mean, they're all three so different. So it's like every time if you talk to Amy, you talk to Noah, you talk to Reese, you're really talking to three very different people. And so you have to, as a parent, kind of like be in that kind of space with them.
Yeah. When you say space to wonder, what do you mean by that?
Explore.
Okay.
Music, art, ideas.
Oh, yeah. I love that.
Yeah, just like, roam.
Yeah.
I mean, the fence line of God's kingdom is really, really big.
Yeah, it is.
So you're not going to probably walk off the property.
Yeah. Some would think that you could very easily.
I know. Exactly. And there's a lot of fear that comes from that.
Yeah, there is. Yeah.
But when you realize, like, no, this is vast.
Yeah.
I mean, he owns the cattle on 1,000 hills.
Yes.
We're not probably going to find the edge of this property.
Yeah. Oh, that's a great point.
And it's like, we're going to be able to like find some really amazing things out there. So go find them, go look for them.
Yep.
And I mean, I don't want them to feel like they're walking a tightrope.
Right. Yeah.
I want them to feel like they live on the biggest Texas ranch there is. Yes,
totally. Yeah. I love that. We don't do good when we feel like we're walking on a tightrope or having to perform for people.
No.
It's not a good space.
Or like you can look at that and ask that, but you can't look at that and ask that. And there's just very few things where you're just like that. Just don't go there.
Yeah.
There's a few things like that where you're like, hey, like, just don't go there. Like, that's not going to help you. If you feel like you need to go there, just come and talk to me.
Okay.
But don't go there.
Yeah.
And of course, I mean, being real with them, like, hey, that hurt my feelings, or your mom and I are struggling. So you saw us arguing there, and that's what that means. It's not this, it's this, and so I feel like just that's a real big important thing for us, is just making sure that we're always transparent about that kind of stuff, you know, and just really trying to keep that space real for them and talk with them, and always in that context of the gospel, the good news. That's always the larger backdrop. Whatever we're talking about, whether it's Beyonce's new album, that teacher at school, that friend, dad's situation at the church, that's always the backdrop.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, totally.
So that was always that was always really important for us. And Meeka and I came together from very different backgrounds. So I think by God's grace, we put together something that was pretty unique in that way. We didn't grow up in the same kind of spaces. So he was very kind to us to bring something together that made sense to them,
Yeah.
in that way. So, but that by far, I mean, that's where I feel most humbled in my life, most challenged, and most deeply gratified.
Really?
As a parent.
Wow.
So I definitely.
Well, that's great.
I mean, I feel like that's, that's a lot.
Yeah.
And it is true.
Well, it's a whole lot, and it's one of the best areas to feel, I think, all of those things you mentioned.
I mean, it's vulnerable.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Now, your family has had or has a shared love of the outdoors.
Yeah.
All the kids in on that? It seems like they are.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, the oldest and the youngest definitely are. Our middle son is probably not as much so as they are.
Mm-hmm.
He's more of a social person, and he's actually about to go to Gordon Conwell Seminary.
Really?
Yeah, he got a full scholarship.
Okay.
Tuition scholarship to study to do his MDiv there.
Wow! Congratulations.
Yeah, I know. Super excited.
Yeah,
so
but he's been out of school for a little while. How old is he?
No. Noah, our middle son, he just graduated from U of H, University of Houston.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
So he just graduated with a philosophy degree there,
Okay.
and he's going to go now to Gordon.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah. So he's more of our ideas, community, connecting, friends, city kind of guy.
Mm-hmm.
And Reese did like 7 summers of whitewater rafting, guiding, backpacking.
Yeah.
And Amy now is coming in. She's going to be doing that. She seems to be on a similar trajectory.
Okay.
As her older brother.
Yeah.
But she's an artist as well, so she paints and creates and all that.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
With the love of music, did you let them experience a wide variety of music?
Yeah.
Okay.
And to this day, they love all kinds of music, and they, it's kind of fun to do that together. They definitely they are much more aware of like some of the more like, kind of indie, kind of out there in the front before everybody else knows about them. So they're always feeding things back to me.
Oh, there you go.
Every once in a while, I'll find something and feed it back to them.
Yeah, I feel real good about it. Well, since you've got those feelers out there, if they're feeding you good music, never hesitate to pass some of the best along to me. Yeah, please do. Because, we love a wide variety of music, and I'm always kind of looking for that next band that I'm just going to listen to for the next few weeks. You know?
You the other day I commented on your Instagram feed about the war on drugs.
Oh man, yeah, we've been listening to the war on drugs nonstop.
Yeah,
for a few weeks.
that was one that my son said, Dad, this was several years ago. They were like, Dad, you gotta check this out.
Yes.
And my daughter probably wishes that the boys had never turned me on to it.
Really?
She's kind of like, whoa, Dad, like this is music you listen to late at night in the car driving across like Kansas.
Well, that also happens to be the type of music that's great to listen to on a Saturday afternoon when you're grilling.
Exactly. That's what I tell her.
Yeah, that's really we really love that band.
Yeah,
listen to a lot of that.
So,
but it's hard to find. Like you don't always find those great little bands that are out there.
No, yeah.
You listen to much Snow Patrol?
I have. It's funny. I listened to Snow Patrol a little bit when we had Guitar Hero. And our Guitar Hero had a Snow Patrol song on it.
Oh, really? Do you remember which one?
No, I can't remember which one it was. So we do that we would do the Snow Patrol song on the Guitar.
Yeah. They were a British band.
Yeah, they're
a
British band. Yeah,
and good also. So never hesitate to pass along. Great music recommendations. We're going to go camping for the first time in years
As a whole
this
family?
weekend. Yeah, the whole family.
Oh, awesome.
Now I forget the name of the park. It's out in Dixon, Tennessee. It's only 45 minutes from our house.
Nice.
I think it's going to be great. I think that's going to be one thing we're going to try to do now that we've had all of our kids, Lord willing, and the youngest Ari is 18 months old. Lincoln's about to be 10. It checks all the boxes for us. Like, we can eat great food. We can have conversations. We're outdoors. We can hike and bike and do those types of things at the campground, sit around. I just think, drink. I mean, there's just a lot of things. It's all the great things. Yes. I think maybe, I don't know. We'll see. We haven't camped in so many years, but maybe that'll turn out to be kind of a thing for us. That's what I'm hoping.
We would do car camping, but it was like you have to haul a lot of stuff out there to make it work. But we would a lot of times go out to Colorado and set up shop like in a house.
Oh, okay.
And then do a trail trip, overnight on the trail.
Like Airbnb at a house or what?
Yeah, set up, get a house for a couple of weeks.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And as many as 4 or 5 weeks.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and set up there. And then we would take the kids out on trails either overnight.
Oh, that sounds awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds really great.
But we would do that because a part of our work that we were doing with the pastors was taking them backpacking. So we would take groups of pastors, husbands and wives, out on the trail for 3 or 4 or 5 days.
Oh, very cool.
So that's how our kids got into doing that out in Colorado. Yeah.
There's something about you can do soul work in Colorado or outdoors that you really can't do in a conference room.
Oh, totally.
So,
such low-hanging fruit. All the teaching moments are like just all built in naturally.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, man. I'll let you go.
That's great talking
Thanks
with
for coming on the podcast, man. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Yeah, it was fantastic.
And yeah, thanks for the Buffalo Trace.
Come back again, man. I'd have you back in anytime. You let me know.
Yeah, thank you, Kent.
All right, man. Have a good weekend.
Thanks, Lincoln, over there. Man in the controls.